You've heard that ancient humans had it easy. 4-hour workdays, endless free time. Here's the study that quietly took that claim apart. Not because the cave paintings aren't real, they are. Not because ancient people didn't play games or make music, they did. The problem is the stat everyone builds the whole story on, the idea that Stone Age life was basically a permanent vacation, comes from one 1960 study that measured something much narrower than how hard people worked. And once you actually check the number, the story changes. And a whole group of ancient people who were almost certainly the most bored humans in history get left out of it completely. In 1966, at a symposium called Man the Hunter, an anthropologist named Marshall Salins made an argument that would become one of the most repeated facts in pop anthropology. He called hunter-gatherers the original affluent society. Not because they had a lot, because they wanted so little and got it so easily that they ended up with tons of spare time. His evidence leaned heavily on field work by researcher Richard Lee, who clocked how many hours the Kung San of the Kalahari spent finding food. The number came out to roughly 15 to 20 hours a week. That's the seed of the number you've heard 100 times. 3 to 6 hours a day, more free time than you, banker's hours, the whole framing. Here's what almost nobody says out loud when they repeat that stat. It only measured acquiring food, not cooking it, not processing it, not making or repairing the tools used to get it, not childcare, not hauling water or firewood. So what happens if you actually count all of that? A team of researchers went and found out. In 2019, researchers Raoul Bouy, Mathieu Chudek, and Joseph Henrich published a study in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences. They pooled real-time use data, over 45,000 recorded observations from 863 adults across 8 small-scale societies with little to no market integration. The result? Men in the least market-integrated societies still worked around 45 hours a week, total. Women worked close to 55 hours a week, and that number barely moved whether they were in a market economy or not. 45 to 55 hours. That's not a 4-hour day. That's a full modern work week or heavier once you count everything a body actually has to do to keep a small group of humans alive. That doesn't mean Silence was lying. It means he was answering a narrower question than everyone thinks he answered. How long does it take to find food, and how much total work does survival require are two different numbers, and one of them got flattened into a meme. So if the adults weren't sitting around with nothing to do, who actually was? Almost every video on this topic answers that question by talking about adults. Cave painters, flute carvers, elders gossiping by the fire. There's a group missing from literally all of it, and it's not a small group. It's roughly half the population. Children. For most of the history of archaeology, kids were basically invisible in the research. It wasn't until 1989 that an archaeologist named Greta Lillehammer wrote a paper explicitly pointing out that the field had left the child's world out of how we reconstruct the past. Before that, if researchers found a small, crudely made object, the assumption was almost always ritual or decorative or made by an unskilled adult, not made by or for a kid. That's starting to change. In Czechia, archaeologists have cataloged nearly 500 clay figurines, roughly 30,000 years old, that are proposed as possible child-made objects precisely because they're crude, inconsistent, and look like the work of someone still learning, not a master craftsperson. In Western Europe, a small reindeer antler carving of a cave lion between 14,000 and 21,000 years old shows heavy polish from handling, the kind of wear you'd expect from something held, rubbed, and played with for years, not something used once in a ceremony. And it's not just Homo sapiens. Researchers studying wear patterns on stone tools have argued that Neanderthal children were given miniature toy versions of axes, not to survive on, but to practice with, the way a kid today might get a toy version of a tool an adult uses for real. On the Oregon coast, archaeologists Robert Losey and Emily Hull examined a roughly 1,700-year-old site and found child-sized antlets, spear-throwing tools, scaled down, clearly built for smaller hands. Here's the part that's genuinely strange and that most creators skip because it doesn't resolve neatly. Archaeologists often can't tell the difference between a child's toy and an object used in adult ritual. Both tend to be small. Both get handled repeatedly. Both leave the same kind of wear on the material. A 2018 paper by researchers Michelle Langley and Marani Lidster in the journal Current Anthropology laid out for the first time in a really systematic way how you might tell them apart, looking at things like where an object was found, how it was worn down, whether the craftsmanship looks like a practiced adult hand or a clumsy young one. Source 6. It's not a solved problem, it's an active one, which means right now, in museum drawers around the world, there are objects sitting in the ritual category that might actually just be 40,000-year-old toys nobody's re-examined yet. So put the two threads together. Adults, by the best current data, were working close to a modern full-time week, not lounging in 4-hour days. And the people who likely had the most unstructured time on their hands, the ones with no food to find, no tools to maintain, no group to defend, were the children. The toy axe, the miniature spear thrower, the crudely shaped clay animal with a kid's fingerprint pressed into it. That might be the actual artifact of ancient boredom, not the masterpiece cave painting made by a skilled adult. A kid, alone for an afternoon, imitating the adults badly, on purpose, because that's what bored kids have always done. Which changes the moral of this whole topic a little. It's not really ancient people had endless free time and turned it into art. It's closer to work has probably always been heavy for adults in every era, including this one. And the actual laboratory for human creativity might not have been the cave wall. It might have been childhood. Every civilization's first artists, storytellers, and toolmakers likely spent years failing at toy versions of it first, unsupervised, bored, with nobody grading the results. The 4-hour workday caveman probably never existed, but somewhere 40,000 years ago, a bored kid was carving a bad little animal out of clay, badly, on purpose, with nobody watching. That's a more honest story than the one you've already seen 5 times this week. If you want the deep dive on the trance/altered states theory of cave art, which is a whole separate weirder rabbit hole, let me know in the comments and I'll make that one next.